Before we talk about resurrection, let us talk about water. Before we talk about sacrifice, let us talk about blood. Not the metaphorical kind, but the literal kind. Gallons of it, pooling in stone gutters, attracting flies in the spring heat, mixing with the mud and the dust and the dung of 10,000 animals that had been herded into the most sacred city in the ancient world. This is Jerusalem in the week of Passover. And before it was holy, it was a logistical crisis. Let us start with a number. The first-century Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, in his Jewish War, records an astonishing statistic from the census of a Passover period. He describes the number of sacrificial lambs counted by Roman officials at over 250,000. Scholars have debated this figure for centuries. Some regard it as rhetorical exaggeration, others as a reasonable reflection of the city's extraordinary population surge during the festival. But even if we cut that number in half, we are still talking about a city that transformed itself in the span of a single week from a town of perhaps 60,000 permanent residents into a pilgrimage site absorbing somewhere between 100,000 and 300,000 visitors, depending on which archaeological estimate you follow. Where did they all sleep? What did they eat? Who managed the water? And who cleaned up the blood? These are not irreverent questions. They are the questions that reveal just how astonishing the faith of the people in that story actually was. Faith forged not in clean marble temples, but in crowds and heat and exhaustion, and the overwhelming smell of an ancient city at the edge of its capacity. This is Holy Week, like you have never seen it before. To understand the week that would change the world, you first have to understand what Passover actually meant as a logistical event. The Torah commanded every Jewish male to appear before the Lord at the temple in Jerusalem 3 times a year, at Passover, at Shavuot, and at Sukkot.
By the 1st century, diaspora Jews from across the Mediterranean world were making the journey. Josephus describes pilgrims arriving from Babylonia, from Egypt, from Syria, from the coastal cities of Asia Minor. This was not a local festival. This was the ancient world's largest annual population movement within the region, and Jerusalem was not built for it. The city of Jerusalem in the time of Jesus sat on a ridge between 2 valleys, the Kidron to the east and the Hinnom to the south and west. This geography was its defense and its curse. The ridge provided natural fortification. It also meant the city could not simply expand outward. Every new building, every new street, every new cistern had to be carved out of limestone hillside. The population of permanent residents, based on the work of archaeologist Magen Broshi and later refined by other scholars, was likely between 60,000 and 80,000 people in the late Second Temple period. When the festivals came, that number exploded. And so the pilgrims slept outside the walls. Archaeological and textual evidence suggests that the hills surrounding Jerusalem, the Mount of Olives, Bethphage, Bethany, became a kind of seasonal tent city. Luke's Gospel itself places Jesus and his disciples in Bethany each night during the final week, returning to the city each morning. This is not theological decoration. This is a description of the pilgrim experience. There was simply no room inside the walls. Think about what that means physically. You have walked, perhaps for days, perhaps for weeks, from Galilee, from the Jordan Valley, from across the river. Your sandals are worn. Your water skins are empty. You have climbed the Ridge Road from Jericho, a route that gains nearly 1,000 meters of elevation over 27 kilometers, a brutal approach in the spring heat that could reach well above 30 degrees Celsius by midday.
And when you finally crest the Mount of Olives and Jerusalem comes into view, the Temple Mount blazing white and gold in the afternoon sun, you do not get to rest. You find a patch of hillside,
you unpack your mat, and you prepare for the most demanding religious week of the year. Now let us talk about the temple itself. Because the temple was not just a place of worship, it was a machine. And in the week of Passover, that machine was running at maximum capacity. The Temple Mount, as reconstructed by Herod the Great beginning around 20 BCE, was one of the largest religious complexes in the ancient world. The platform alone, the vast esplanade that Herod built by extending the natural hilltop with massive retaining walls and fill, covered approximately 35 acres, or about 14 hectares. The western wall that exists today is simply the retaining wall of that platform, and even now it conveys something of the scale. Stones that individual blocks weighing hundreds of tons, some reaching lengths of over 13 meters, set without mortar using a precision that still astonishes structural engineers. But the stones are not the point. The point is what happened inside. The temple functioned as the central bank, the Supreme Court, the National Archive, and the only valid slaughterhouse in all of Judaism simultaneously. The Mishnah, compiled around 200 CE, but recording much earlier practice, describes the temple's administrative structure in detail that reads less like religious literature and more like an operations manual. There were treasurers and supervisors for every function. There were officials responsible for the keys, for the lots, for the curtains, for the shewbread. There were 24 priestly divisions that rotated through service, and during the 3 pilgrimage festivals, all 24 divisions served simultaneously. The week of Passover was all hands on deck. And the central task of that week was blood. The Passover sacrifice was prescribed in Exodus, a lamb
Without blemish, 1 year old, slaughtered at twilight on the 14th of Nisan. Every household, every pilgrim group needed one, and they all needed to be slaughtered in the temple precincts, by or under the supervision of the priests. The Mishnah Tractate Pesachim describes the process with the calm efficiency of an abattoir manual. The lambs were brought in successive waves. The temple gates were opened. A group entered. The gates were closed behind them. The shofar was blown. The lambs were slaughtered. The priests collected the blood in gold and silver basins, passed hand to hand in a chain to the altar, and the basin was tossed against the base of the altar in a single practiced motion. Then the carcasses were hung on iron hooks along the walls of the courtyard and skinned. The next group was admitted. The process repeated until every lamb was slaughtered. Josephus and the Mishnah both suggest this took most of the afternoon. Consider the volume of blood this produced. A single lamb of 1 year contains roughly 1.5 to 2 liters of blood. If we accept even a conservative estimate of 30,000 lambs, far below Josephus's number, that is 45,000 to 60,000 liters of blood flowing across the temple courtyard in a single afternoon. The temple had drainage channels cut into the stone for exactly this purpose. Archaeological excavations beneath the Temple Mount area have found evidence of drainage infrastructure beneath the platform. The blood and water from the ritual washings flowed down into the Kidron Valley below, which ancient sources describe in Passover season as running red. The smell alone would have been overwhelming. Blood and viscera and the smoke of fat burning on the altar fire, which was kept burning continuously. The roar of tens of thousands of animals. The chanting of the Hallel Psalms by the Levitical choir, Psalms 113 through 118, sung in a continuous loop throughout the afternoon, so that the entire city echoed with praise while the slaughter proceeded. This is the environment into which Jesus of Nazareth walked on the day the Gospels record him overturning the tables of the money changers. Let us stop there, because that moment, which every Gospel records, is almost always read as a spiritual confrontation. And it was. But it was also a confrontation within a very specific economic system, one that had profound logistical and financial logic. The money changers were not con artists. They were a necessary infrastructure. The temple tax, a half shekel required annually of every Jewish male, had to be paid in Tyrian silver shekels, which were the standard coinage of the region, and the only coins acceptable for temple use due to their consistent silver purity. Pilgrims arriving from across the Mediterranean carried Roman coins, Greek coins, coins from a dozen different mints. They needed Tyrian currency. The money changers provided it for a fee. This was not a racket, or rather, it was a regulated service that had become, as all regulated services do, an opportunity for extraction. The animal sellers served a parallel function. You could theoretically bring your own lamb from home, but the lamb had to be inspected and certified as without blemish by temple inspectors. Animals purchased within the temple precincts arrived pre-certified. The convenience premium was substantial. For a pilgrim who had walked for 2 weeks from the Galilee, carrying a lamb across the Jordan Valley was not practical. Buying one at the temple was the rational economic choice, which gave the sellers considerable pricing power. The outer court of the temple, the court of the Gentiles, the only area where non-Jews were permitted, had become, in effect, a market. The noise and the commerce had penetrated into what was supposed to be a space of prayer for all nations.
When Jesus quotes Isaiah 56:7, "My house shall be called a house of prayer for all peoples," he is invoking a text about the inclusion of foreigners in the temple's sacred life. The market had consumed exactly the space set aside for them. Now, let us follow Jesus through the rest of the week. Because what the Gospels describe, once you understand the logistics, is a man moving with extraordinary strategic precision through a city under enormous pressure. The pattern is consistent across all 4 Gospels. Days in the temple, teaching and debating. Nights outside the walls in Bethany or on the Mount of Olives. Each morning's return to the city was a deliberate act of public presence. The temple authorities, the chief priests and the scribes, wanted to arrest him, but Mark records explicitly that they feared the crowd. This was not an abstract concern. Passover Jerusalem was a powder keg. The Romans had learned this through painful experience. The Roman prefect, in this case Pontius Pilate, typically based his administration in Caesarea Maritima on the coast. But during the major festivals, Pilate came to Jerusalem. He brought soldiers. He set up his headquarters likely at the Herodian palace in the upper city, what Josephus calls the Praetorium. The Antonia fortress, built by Herod the Great immediately adjacent to the Temple Mount's northwest corner, housed a permanent garrison that could deploy directly onto the temple platform via staircases in the event of a riot. Archaeological investigation of the area has confirmed the general location and scale of Antonia, though debates continue about its precise dimensions. The political calculus was delicate and everyone understood it. Pilate needed the festival to pass without incident. The chief priests needed Pilate's cooperation to maintain their authority. The zealot factions needed the festival crowds to sustain any uprising. And Jesus of Nazareth, arriving from Galilee with a following, quoting scripture in the temple courts and drawing larger crowds each day, was a variable that none of the existing power structures could easily categorize. The Last Supper, as the Gospels describe it, was almost certainly a Passover Seder, or, at the very least, a meal held in the context of the Passover preparation. John's chronology differs from the synoptics on the precise timing, and scholars continue to debate whether the meal was on the 14th or 15th of Nisan. But the logistics of the meal itself are described with unusual specificity in Luke and Mark. Jesus sends 2 disciples ahead to find a man carrying a jar of water, an unusual sight since water carrying was typically women's work, and to follow him to a house where the owner will show them a large upper room furnished and ready. This is not mystical direction finding. This is operational security. The city was full of spies and informants. The authorities were actively looking for an opportunity to arrest Jesus away from the crowds. A prearranged signal, a man with a water jar in a crowded city at festival time, was a way to communicate a location without stating it explicitly. The upper room itself, private, owned by a sympathizer, already prepared. Someone had arranged this in advance. The meal that followed, the bread broken, the wine poured, the words spoken over both, occurred in a room where every element had Passover resonance. The unleavened bread recalled the flight from Egypt. The bitter herbs recalled the bitterness of slavery. The 4 cups of wine, which the Mishnah later codifies as the structure of the Seder, each connected to one of God's 4 promises of redemption in Exodus 6. When Jesus took bread and said, "This is my body," he was doing so in a context where his audience understood food as memory, as covenant, as the physical substance through which the presence of God in history was recalled and reenacted. Then they went out to the Mount of Olives, Gethsemane. The name means oil press in Aramaic, reflecting the olive groves and the pressing facilities that gave the area its economic function, lay at the foot of the Mount of Olives, across the Kidron Valley from the eastern wall of the Temple Mount. It was a place Jesus apparently visited regularly. John records that Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place. The arrest, then, was not random. It was coordinated. Judas had provided the location. A detachment of temple guards, and John mentions Roman soldiers as well, though scholars debate this detail, came with lanterns and torches and weapons. The logistics of moving armed men through Jerusalem at night during Passover without triggering a riot required coordination between the temple authorities and the Roman garrison. This was planned at the highest levels of the city's power structure. What followed, the trials, the hearings before Caiaphas and before Pilate, unfolded in locations that archaeologists and historians have worked for generations to identify precisely. The site of the high priest's house is debated, though the traditional location on the western hill of the upper city is supported by some evidence. Pilate's praetorium is contested between the Herodian palace and the Antonia fortress. What is not contested is the speed of the proceedings. Arrest in the middle of the night, preliminary hearing before Caiaphas, transferred to Pilate at first light, the crowd assembled in front of the praetorium by the time the city was fully awake. Everything moved with the urgency of people who wanted the situation resolved before the festival crowds were fully mobilized for the day. Roman crucifixion was not primarily a method of execution. It was a method of communication. The Romans crucified at roadsides, at city gates, in visible public places, specifically so that the maximum number of people would see the consequences of challenging Roman authority. Golgotha, the place of the skull, is described in the Gospels as near both a road and a garden, outside but near the city walls. The traditional site, now enclosed within the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, was outside the walls of the first century city, a fact that received significant archaeological support from excavations conducted by Kathleen Kenyon in the 1960s and subsequent work, which helped establish that the area lay outside the city limits in the first century. Crucifixion victims were typically left on the cross for days as a public warning. The request by Joseph of Arimathea to take the body before sunset, before the Sabbath began, which in Passover week was a high Sabbath, was unusual enough that Pilate reportedly checked with the centurion to confirm that death had already occurred. Burial followed Jewish custom with desperate speed. The garden tomb near the crucifixion site, the spices and linen noted by the Gospels, the stone rolled across the entrance.
All of these reflect authentic first-century burial practice in the Jerusalem area. Rock-cut tombs of this type have been found throughout the hills surrounding the city, many of them dating to exactly this period. And then comes the Sunday, the first day of the week. The women who had prepared spices and could not complete the burial rites before the Sabbath, because you could not anoint a body on the Sabbath, came at first light to finish what had been interrupted. They came with the practical concern of who would roll the stone away. They came prepared for the physical work of care for the dead. What they found, and what the Gospels describe, each in its own voice, with details that are neither perfectly harmonized nor completely irreconcilable, is the event upon which all of Christian history turns. An empty tomb, a folded burial cloth. And then, reported across multiple gospel traditions in ways that resist reduction to a single neat narrative, encounters with the risen Jesus. In a garden, on a road, in a locked room, at a lakeside. Here is what the hidden systems lens shows us about all of this. The people who experienced Holy Week did not experience it from a distance. They experienced it exhausted, footsore, dehydrated, overwhelmed by crowds and heat and noise. The disciples who fell asleep in Gethsemane, the same disciples who had been walking and teaching and debating in the temple courts all day, who had eaten a full Passover meal after dark, who were now in the middle of a garden at midnight. These were not spiritually weak men. They were physically exhausted men. Their faith was not forged in comfort. It was forged in the grinding, relentless difficulty of pilgrimage, of poverty, of life under occupation, of the particular vulnerability of people who had staked everything on a claim they could not yet prove. The women at the tomb on Sunday morning came with spices, because that was what you did when someone you loved had died. You completed the burial. You honored the body. You did the physical, unglamorous, necessary work of love. The first witnesses to the resurrection were people who came not looking for a miracle, but to do a practical task. This is not a detail. This is the whole point. The hidden system of Holy Week is this: that the most theologically significant week in human history, according to the Christian claim, unfolded not in a clean, controlled, reverent space, but in the middle of the largest, most chaotic, most crowded, most politically volatile week in Jerusalem's annual calendar. The divine, if the story is true, chose the most difficult possible conditions. The busiest week, the fullest city, the most watched moment, the most heavily guarded power structure. And into all of that, the blood in the gutters, the crowds on the hillside, the soldiers in the Antonia, the money changers in the outer court, the exhausted disciples, the frightened women, the calculating high priest, the uncertain prefect. Into all of that, something happened that no one had the administrative infrastructure to manage, that no system of control could contain, and that the city's entire logistical apparatus was completely unprepared for. An empty tomb changes nothing about the systems. The water still needed to carry. The lambs still needed slaughtering. The pilgrims still needed places to sleep. But the people who came out of that garden, the women and then the disciples, and then thousands more in the weeks that followed, were people who had seen all the hidden systems of the world, who understood exactly how power worked and how death worked and how Rome worked, and who nevertheless went out into that same city and said, "Something is different now. Something has changed." And not one army or treasury or aqueduct or execution squad has the power to put it back the way it was. That is the hidden system beneath the hidden systems. And it is the one that no engineering, no matter how brilliant, has ever been able to build.
What comes next? The hidden systems do not stop at the empty tomb. In the weeks that follow, a small group of Galilean fishermen and their companions will attempt something even more logistically improbable. They will try to organize, feed, and sustain a growing movement in a city that has just executed their leader, under the watchful eye of both the temple establishment and the Roman administration. How did the early church actually function? What was their economy? Where did they live? How did they communicate across the empire? The hidden systems of the Book of Acts. That is where we go next.
This documentary was produced using AI-generated visuals and an AI-generated narrator. All content is intended for educational and historical purposes, grounded in biblical texts, archaeological sources, and peer-reviewed historical research.